On June 6, 1944, more than 13,000 American paratroopers leapt into the darkness over Normandy. It was the largest airborne invasion in history, a storm of men and machines raining down from the night sky. But what looked like a bold, perfectly planned strike on paper quickly unraveled into chaos once the first parachutes opened. These soldiers were not ordinary men. Many had volunteered for one of the most dangerous jobs of the war, to be dropped behind enemy lines, hours before the D-Day landings, armed only with what they could carry. Their mission was to seize bridges, cut German communications, and block reinforcements before Allied troops stormed the beaches at dawn. If they failed, the entire invasion, and the fate of Europe, could collapse before it even began. Yet what awaited them was far from the precise landing zones carefully drawn on Allied maps. The paratroopers were scattered for miles, dropped into swamps, hedgerows, even right into the middle of German strongholds. Some drowned under the weight of their gear. Others landed directly in enemy fire. And still, against impossible odds, they fought on. The story of these men is not just one of strategy and statistics. It's a tale of courage, confusion, and sacrifice in the blackest hours of war. And what happened to them that night is far more shocking than history books often tell. By the summer of 1944, the war in Europe had raged for nearly 5 brutal years. Nazi Germany still controlled most of Western Europe, its fortress stretching from Norway down to the southern coast of France. The Allies had fought their way across North Africa and up through Italy, but the real blow, the one that could finally shatter Hitler's grip, had to come across the English Channel. That target was Normandy, a quiet region of northern France. Its landscape was a maze of hedgerows, farmlands, and small villages. The beaches there were long and flat, but just beyond the sand lay cliffs, gun emplacements, and the ever-watchful German defenses. Behind those beaches, narrow roads and stone bridges threaded the countryside. They might look ordinary, but to generals on both sides, they were lifelines. If the Allies captured them, they could pour tanks and men inland. If the Germans held them, the invasion would die on the shore. For Adolf Hitler, Normandy was only one piece of a vast Atlantic wall, a line of bunkers and defenses meant to keep invaders out. For the Allies, it was the single doorway back into Europe. And for the men who would drop from the skies that night, every hedgerow, every farmhouse, every bridge became a battlefield where the fate of the world would be decided. The stage was set. The land was waiting. And into that darkness, thousands of paratroopers were about to jump. The paratroopers chosen for the invasion were among the most elite soldiers the United States had to offer. Units like the 82nd Airborne Division and the 101st Airborne Division had been forged through grueling training. They were taught to fight isolated, cut off from reinforcements, surviving only on speed, aggression, and raw determination. Many of these men were barely out of their teens, yet their orders demanded maturity beyond their years. Jump into occupied France, disrupt German defenses, and hold ground until the beach landings could link up with them. Their commanders understood the scale of the gamble. Major General Maxwell Taylor of the 101st and Major General Matthew Ridgway of the 82nd knew that their men would land deep inside enemy territory. Supplies would be limited, communication uncertain. But if they succeeded, they would choke off German reinforcements and open the path for tens of thousands of Allied troops storming the beaches. Failure, however, could mean disaster not just for the airborne divisions, but for the entire invasion. On the German side, the defenses appeared strong but were riddled with cracks. Hitler had poured concrete into bunkers along the coastline, but he had spread his armies too thin. Many German commanders believed the Allies would strike further north at Pas-de-Calais. Normandy, in their eyes, was secondary. Poor intelligence, combined with Hitler's overconfidence, left stretches of countryside lightly guarded, while other areas bristled with machine guns and anti-aircraft fire. As night fell on June 5, 1944, Allied airfields across England buzzed with tension. Paratroopers loaded their weapons, double-checked their gear, and waited for the order to board. The air was heavy with cigarette smoke and nervous laughter. Some scribbled last letters home, tucking them into their uniforms. Others sat quietly, staring at the floor, lost in private thoughts. Outside, rows of C-47 transport planes rumbled on the runways, engines growling in the darkness. The men climbed aboard, the smell of oil and canvas thick inside the fuselages. Red cabin lights dimmed their faces into shadows. Silence settled as the planes began to taxi, one after another, into the unknown. Above them, storm clouds gathered. Below them, Normandy slept. And in a matter of minutes, that fragile calm was about to shatter. Shortly after midnight, the skies over Normandy filled with the deep drone of hundreds of C-47 transport planes. Inside, paratroopers clutched their rifles, helmets pressed tight, waiting for the green light. But as they neared the drop zones, the carefully drawn invasion maps began to unravel. Low clouds, poor visibility, and relentless German flak tore through the night. Tracers streaked upward like fiery claws, shredding the air around the aircraft. Pilots swerved wildly, desperate to dodge the barrage, scattering their formations. When the green lights finally blinked on, men hurled themselves into the void, but few landed where they were meant to. Some fell into flooded fields, vanishing beneath the weight of their equipment before they could even unclip their chutes. Others crashed into orchards, stone walls, or the roofs of French farmhouses. A handful landed directly in German-occupied towns, bullets snapping past before they could even cut free from their harnesses. The German defenders, jolted awake by the thunder above, scrambled to respond. Machine gun nests opened fire on drifting parachutes, turning the night sky into a killing ground. Patrols fanned out, hunting for survivors among the hedgerows. Yet in the chaos, moments of defiance shone through. Scattered squads of paratroopers regrouped, ambushing convoys, seizing crossroads, and knocking out enemy gun positions with grenades and satchel charges. These small victories gave brief flashes of hope. A farmhouse cleared, a bridge secured, a patrol silenced. Each felt like a foothold in the dark. But those wins came at a staggering cost, and for every squad that found each other, another was wiped out before firing a single shot. As dawn crept closer, the countryside echoed with gunfire, explosions, and cries in the dark. The men who survived knew they were only at the beginning. The beaches had not yet been stormed, the German counterattack had not yet come, and the worst, they sensed, was still waiting in the shadows. The night of June 6th became a storm of fire and confusion. Across the fields of Normandy, the paratroopers fought not as organized divisions, but as scattered bands of men, some groups no larger than a squad, others just 2 or 3 soldiers clutching their rifles in the dark. Gunfire crackled from hedgerows. Mortar shells thudded into the earth, spraying mud and steel. The smell of cordite and smoke mixed with the stench of manure from farmyards turned into killing grounds. Every step forward was blind, every shadow a possible ambush. In one village, a group of 82nd Airborne troopers stormed a German-held crossroads. They hurled grenades into windows, kicked down doors, and cleared the streets house by house. Their M1 Garens barked in sharp, mechanical rhythm. 8 rounds, ping of the clip ejecting, reload, and fire again. Germans fired back with MG-42 machine guns, their devastating 1,200 rounds per minute ripping through stone walls and wooden beams, turning buildings into death traps. The air was alive with splinters, ricochets, and screams. Elsewhere, men of the 101st found themselves pinned in orchards by a column of German armor. The metallic clatter of tank tracks rolled closer. Bazooka teams crawled into position, their hearts pounding so loudly it drowned out the engines. The first rocket streaked out, smashing into a Panzer side plate. Fire blossomed, crew spilling out, some alive, some burning. Yet more tanks pressed forward. The paratroopers scattered, darting between hedges, firing rifle grenades, laying mines in desperation. For the Germans, the chaos was just as consuming. Their officers shouted contradictory orders, unsure of where the main landings would occur. Some units fought with fanatical determination, others broke apart in panic, convinced the countryside was swarming with tens of thousands of Americans when in reality it was only scattered pockets of resistance. They too bled heavily, convoys ambushed in narrow lanes, sentries knifed in the dark, bunkers overrun by men who appeared like ghosts out of the fields. Amid the carnage, moments of raw courage stood out. A lone radio operator transmitting under fire, calling in strikes from Allied planes. Medics dragging wounded men into barns, using shirts as tourniquets. Soldiers fighting until their weapons jammed, then grabbing German rifles from the dead to keep going. The battle raged through the night and into the first pale light of dawn. Exhaustion clawed at every man. Faces blackened with smoke, hands trembling, nerves stretched to breaking. Yet as the sun rose, the horizon revealed a sight that changed everything. The English Channel, dotted with the silhouettes of an armada. Thousands of ships. Thousands of men. The beaches alive with fire and steel. The paratroopers, scattered and bleeding, had done just enough. Bridges were blown. Roads were blocked. German reinforcements delayed. The beaches would hold. The tide of the war had begun to turn. By the end of June 6th, the fields of Normandy were littered with the wreckage of the night's desperate struggle. Burned-out gliders lay broken in the hedgerows. Parachutes hung like ghostly shrouds from trees and church steeples. The air still carried the bitter stench of smoke, blood, and gunpowder. The cost was staggering. Of the more than 13,000 American paratroopers who jumped that night, thousands never made it to their objectives. Many were killed before they even touched the ground. Others drowned in the flooded fields, their bodies later recovered still bound in harnesses. Entire sticks of men were wiped out in the first minutes of contact. By morning, some units could account for barely half their strength. Yet, despite the chaos, the mission had not failed. Scattered groups of the 82nd and 101st Airborne had seized bridges, cut key roads, and blown up supply lines. In Saint-Mihiel, the 82nd made history by capturing the first town in occupied France. The 101st, though fractured, held critical crossroads that delayed German counterattacks. These small but vital gains gave the beach landings room to expand. The names of commanders like Matthew Ridgway and Maxwell Taylor would be remembered for their leadership under impossible circumstances. But the true burden was carried by the ordinary paratrooper, young men whose courage turned disaster into survival. By nightfall on June 6th, the Allies had secured a fragile foothold in Normandy. The beaches had held. The airborne troops had paid a heavy price, but they had bought the time and space for the invasion to succeed. The longest day was over. The real war for France had only just begun. History remembers the D-Day paratroopers as the vanguard of liberation. Their drop into Normandy was chaotic, bloody, and far from the flawless operation Allied planners envisioned. Yet it worked. By scattering German defenses, delaying reinforcements, and seizing vital ground, they ensured the beach landings had a chance to succeed. Without their sacrifice in the fields and villages of Normandy, the story of June 6th might have ended very differently. The legacy of these men reshaped military strategy. Airborne operations proved both their potential and their terrible cost, showing the world that lightly armed soldiers dropped behind enemy lines could tip the balance of a war. Their courage became legend, etched into regimental mottos, parades, and memorials across Europe. Towns like Saint-Mihiel still honor the paratroopers who fell from the night sky, their memory carried by generations who never forgot what was given for their freedom. But beyond strategy and victory lies something more enduring. The image of young men who leapt into darkness, knowing the odds were against them, and chose to fight anyway. They were told their mission could decide the fate of the world. And in a sense, it did. The fields of Normandy are quiet now. Yet if you stand among the hedgerows at dawn, you can almost hear the echo of parachutes snapping open and the whispered courage of those who never came home.